Good evening. I'm John Bailey. This is People to be Heard, the program where people who have something to say have their say. Tonight, you've got Dennis Rudin, host of Profiles and Issues, a cable program elsewhere in Westchester County. He's been doing it for about a year, and he is on to sort of take a look at news. And he was also a teacher in the New York City school system at DeWitt Clinton High School, a small businessman, and a political operative. And so he is here to share his observations on the present political scene, cable news and news in general, and perhaps a little on the education situation we face based on an experience. First, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Why did you start your program?
Well, I originally got into cable as a young man in the 70s. I was a political activist in the town of Harrison, and the mayor supervisor appointed me to the cable committee when cable was first introduced, and the companies were bidding to get in. And they needed someone to monitor the programming, the studio, etc. And so I was chosen on the committee because they felt I was the youngest and the best looking at that time.
Well,
and
you all were at one time.
But I had accumulated a lot of knowledge working in Harrison politics, and I also studied history, fell in love with history in the 8th grade, and so between the two backgrounds, they felt that that my knowledge would serve them well. So they asked me to do a cable show, and I said, "Are you kidding? I've never been in front of a camera, etc." But we eventually got over that. But I found it challenging, and I found that there was a market on the local level that was being overlooked on larger venues.
Yeah. What was that market?
The market was, your local politics, your local retail politics, people that ran for council. All they had to do was go to a young local newspaper reporter and give some information, and that was it. And of course, they could run around, but they would say sometimes, one candidate once told me, "Well, I don't know if I want to come on your show because when I have you on, I'm on tape. And I can't go to one end of the town and say one thing, and go to the other end and say another thing."
Yeah, which is what they do all the time.
Well, I'm not saying all of them.
No, but that's
there are plenty
fascinating
of good people.
that he said that.
Well, he said it off camera.
Right. Well, they never say the good stuff on camera.
But the bottom line is, John, and I can tell you this because I taught government for many years as a teacher. Many people, at times education is wasted on the young because they don't get to use it till 7 or 8 years later, once they start, and they're so busy in the workplace, raising families and everything.
Right.
And I've picked this up at grassroots meetings too, where a lot of these grassroots organizations, they call in either teachers or professors to go over local government with the citizens. The citizens have forgotten at times how to participate in government, or they take it for granted that because we were born in a democracy, that democracy is always going to exist, that we're always going to have free rights, and that we're always going to be protected. And that doesn't always
We have
happen.
learned rather quickly that that is not the case.
Right. And as I said, my show, Profiles and Issues, my goal is not necessary. I'm not interested in stumping my guests. What I'm interested in is having the people actually get to know who this person is, what makes this person tick. Yes, I introduce issues into it because I want people to know what affects their lives. A lot of times people have no idea what the difference in services is between their local government and their county government. Because
It's only when they
get
get in trouble. It's only when they get in trouble. It's only when their neighborhood is threatened by development that they even think of marching down to City Hall.
Right, right. So that was perfect, John. You got it right.
Exactly. And so in your show, you've had many interesting guests on. Here are some of them, a couple of slides I have. Right. Hopefully they'll come up as we're talking about that. That's the website.
Right.
You're interviewing a really interesting person here, the leader of the Stand With Us movement. And then here are some other celebrities you've had. And Andrew Stewart Cousins, David McKay Wilson, whose name I'm always forgetting. And,
he's an investigative reporter.
Yeah. And
Paul Feiner.
And across, well, yes, but so you really across the board here. And what have you learned from these persons making policy for Westchester, the towns and cities today, from doing your shows last year? What is your
what I've learned, and not just from a distance, but I also was lucky when I first was serving in Harrison politics. I used to do a local monthly show with a mayor, with a different mayor of Harrison, and he was a very brilliant guy, and he was not afraid of television, and we used to meet every month, and we used to sit down and actually confront issues and present both sides. What I've learned is that on a positive note, you have to, when you identify with the people, when you're open with the people, you bring them along in the process, and you let them know what's happening. If things go sour, they're not all of a sudden going to turn on you. If you have inclusion, if you try to bypass party politics, which is possible on the local level, because taking out the garbage or water pollution is not necessarily
removing snow,
is not necessarily philosophical issue differences like national politics. Then you're there for success. The weakness that I've seen in many leaders who are very gifted, with their talents.
People you've interviewed.
And people that I've worked with, such as doing the local show with this past mayor who's unfortunately not with us any longer. They have a need to be loved. And what I learned,
don't we all?
But what I learned in politics, if you want to be a good politician, you don't go into, if you want to be good, consensus works most of the time, but not all the time. There are issues that you are going to be hit with where you just have to take the heat and do what's right.
And make a decision.
And many of them, I have seen brilliant men go and women go to pieces because the idea of not being loved and not getting all that exhilaration and it just so I say to young people, there is a positive side of politics, but don't go into it if you want to be loved. Go into it because you love where you live, you care about the quality of life, and you want to help other people have that quality of life.
Or at least that's how you start.
Well, I think if you have the right mental attitude, then you can do well and survive. Otherwise, you're going to become very bitter and very miserable.
Do you feel consensus is a good thing, or is it a bad thing?
Well, if
do we wind up with something wishy-washy eventually?
If you build consensus, it means that you're educating your people. And as an educator, as a teacher, I believe that's what's our strength. It's when people aren't educated and people don't know the facts, then they can't make intelligent choices.
I see. Speaking of education for a moment, you were a high school teacher in New York City at Clinton, and you have gone through the whole era of trying to upgrade our students' performances with the Common Core, etc. I interviewed two different professors on this program, one from North Carolina and another from upstate New York, and they said college students are not prepared to do college work from a writing and reading skills standpoint. How do you assess the students whom you've taught? Were they ready to do college work?
Some were.
Some
many were.
Yeah.
At DeWitt Clinton, many were.
Yeah.
It was because it wasn't like Bronx High School of Science where they had to take an academic test, but they were screened for, and although I did have honors classes, and they all went to college in the honors classes, and the other classes, a number of them went, but also they also went to vocational school. It's education is more than just the classroom. Education starts at home. And if there's no cohesive family unit, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a mother or father or both, it could be a grandparents, an uncle, whatever. The student has to know. When I was young growing up in elementary school, my mother made me know that after dinner the books came out. And at the elementary level, if I had problems, she was able to help me. And later on, my father was a gifted scholar. I was lucky. If I, had some essays that I was working on in advanced comp, he was a master. I would exchange ideas. I was extremely lucky. But the point I'm trying to say is, the roots start in the home. And today, sometimes you have situations where there's only one parent, or two parents are working. So there's not that kind of structure. Yes, after school tutoring helps, but the teacher can only get on the phone and call the parents and recommend to the parents that the students come in for it. The teacher can't act like the father or mother and say, look, you're coming in or else we're taking away your allowance.
Often the teacher has to inspire the child to put the effort into it, and she's probably the only person super encouraging that effort to draw them out. I know one who has done this, so I mean you've got to do everything.
There's one or two other important components. Teaching in the city, I also had the opportunity to work with low-income immigrants who came into the system. And even though they were assigned ESL classes, if they were not of Hispanic origin, let's say they came from an Arab country, or let's say they came from from France or some other country, even though they were assigned ESL classes, it takes a while till that kicks in, and we have a very rigid system. And so as a result, I was a little bit an unorthodox teacher. I went to my assistant principal one semester and I said to her, I have a wonderful class of people from the Middle East, Arab students. They hardly know any English. I'm not going to flunk them the first marking period. It's not fair. So she gave me a political answer. She didn't give me any answer. So I just, I put a B in for the first marking period. But I worked with them, and they worked very hard. A good teacher knows it's not just words, it's visual concepts. It's relating to their life. It's moving with your hands,
making adjustments.
I mean, I went to the ESL teacher and tried to get some of her techniques. The bottom line is, John, it has a happy ending. By the end of the second marking period, not only were these students passing, some got B's for their final grades and some got A's. And this is in New York City. So there are plenty of good stories. Unfortunately, some of the bad stories is because some of these kids that come there just have nothing. They have no family background, nothing. And the teacher can't do everything,
No.
You can't be a mother and father and everything.
Okay, so do you believe that Common Core was a mistake?
Yes, from my perspective, I was still teaching when Common Core was introduced. One of the things that I loved and one of the challenges as a teacher was that I had, even if I was just teaching one course, government, you have 5 classes. Not all students function on the same academic level.
Of course.
Some are advanced, some are special ed, some are inclusion classes. You have to adjust the lessons to their personalities and to their individual needs.
Such an obvious concept.
And you have to be creative.
Yeah.
And you know something, that's what I loved about the job. Then comes Common Core. They get a name of a teacher who had a particular program in a particular state that worked. They use her name, but the bottom line is everything is mandated. No longer can I plan my own lessons. I have to, from the Board of Ed, the rules come down, what has to be in the lesson, what has to be implemented. In other words, I am just some kind of like robot following instructions in the classroom, not being able to process what I see from my students and change the lesson. And it's not just my opinion. If you speak to many people in Westchester County, regardless, you know, in many elite neighborhoods like Rye, Scarsdale, they will tell you that Common Core is burning out their children, it's burning out their teachers, because
and the testing.
Yeah, you know, and testing. John, if we can just, one quick story. I had a student who hated history. She just hated it. Why? She couldn't relate to it. So I said to her, I gave her an assignment. I said, I want you to go home and I want you to write down what you like to do, what gives you pleasure in life. So one of the things that she puts down in her report to me, she loves animals. She said her house is like a zoo. The family, has like 8 or 10 pets. So I give her a special assignment. I send her to the library to do research on progressive legislation to help animals, to protect animals. She does that. 3 days later, she hands in the report with a big smile on her face. And she says to me, you know, I really love doing this assignment. I think I begin to get it now. I made the course relevant to her life. It wasn't just some abstract thing where she had to force herself to open up the book.
Well, how does education need to be fixed? Everybody seems to be wanting to do that. Is it administration? Is it too protective of jobs of teachers and administrators?
I'm not saying that all teachers are perfect, but there are many good teachers who go into teaching because they happen to like it. But what I've noticed with administrators, I was very lucky. The first administrator that I had had taught for 10 years. She was a fully competent teacher, and she would give demo lessons for the department on new topics that would be coming in. We had to do anything for the regents, etc. She was a master teacher, and she also had good managerial skills, good people skills, and so we loved her. She came in to help us, to nurture us. Today, that doesn't seem to be the case. Many people that go into administration, frankly, go in because they want to get out of the classroom. I have no grievance if they want to make higher pay, especially if they're good at what they do. But they want to get out of the classroom. They don't really they're not capable all the time of doing good demo lessons or of even doing demo lessons. And they're just in there to just write you up. The other thing is hire administrative teachers that incorporate nuances in the regents or other exams. They sit in their ivory tower. They should be made to come. They should have to come at least 7 to 10 days out of the year and demonstrate those new programs that they introduce, so that they can actually be successful in the classroom. With Common Core, I was there when Common Core was implemented. The teachers that the state hired and paid a lot of money, they would give what you call hypothetical case studies. But then when you would Ask them questions about your own classroom, or ask them to come in and show how to implement it. That we don't do.
Well, a disconnect.
A total disconnect.
Persons who are not dealing in a situation where you're actually in the action of education are making decisions about how to fix it. It didn't make sense, and this is very enlightening. Hearing it from a reasonable teacher who has great experience under it, telling us what's wrong with it. That's a first, because all we've heard is generalities.
You see, it doesn't always get out. Teachers are rarely interviewed, and they're afraid also if they're still working because they're going to lose their job.
Yes, I mean, we live in an atmosphere of fear on the corporate level, in the political level, and on the education level, because nobody wants to say, the emperor has no clothes.
Exactly.
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 The fairy tales are all true. Now, quickly, since you are a follower of news from the perspective of a history teacher, and how do you analyze national and local news coverage? What's right? What's wrong?
Well, I think local news is not what it used to be. Example of, and I will use the channel. Up until 2 years ago, News 12 used to have a weekend edition, I believe on Sundays, where they would interview office holders or civic people about programs. They no longer have that. It's straight news. They do cover the stories. They do send young people in to get 2 or 3 minute sound bites, and that's it. And I think one of the reasons, not just in local, but in national news, is because in the 1950s, and I studied this historically, I was very young then, news was considered the crown jewel of networks like CBS. You had Walter Cronkite, you had Eric Severin.
Who edited his own shows.
Right, and you had executives who would fight for these people so that the factual news was reported. You don't have that today. Everything is money. That's the bottom line. If we're making money, fine. If not, we cut. Any way we can cut out money. So maybe we don't have seasoned reporters. We get in new reporters. And one thing I can tell you as a teacher too, if you just try to hire young, and you try to get rid of people, you know, before their careers are finished, who are the young people going to learn from in their particular department? And this is not just with education, this is with news, this is with everything. Young people usually come in and they look to older people to learn. Now, as far as national news, some of the things that CNN and the other channels can do as far as the coverage, the quickness, is fantastic. The technology is fantastic. The problem is that I think there's too much editorializing. There's too much talking heads that come in. Like example, if you're watching a liberal channel, do you know that in many instances, not all, but many, the talking heads that they come in represent liberal think tanks. And if you're watching a conservative channel, they represent conservative think tanks. So instead of getting 2 points of view, you're only going to get continuously 1 point of view.
Yes.
So we're being shortchanged in that aspect. But as far as the technology, as far as and of course professional journalists, you know, that breed, again, the people that are doing the hiring are more interested, the people who own the corporate end of it, of let's make something exciting, let's make it ratings versus relevant news.
Well, that I sort of agree with it. I agree with that analysis totally. I started the White Plains Citizen Reporter website and this program and the White Plains Week program because I felt the Gannett chain just was not covering the local news well at all. Maybe one story a week on White Plains. and this was 15, 16 years ago.
Right.
And that's gotten worse now.
Right.
And it's just not good for the public.
And not only that, just very quickly, the character of the newspaper has changed. It used to be more local. Now they, it's not just one company. They incorporate several companies. They're connected with USA Today and everything, and they're
use a lot of
constantly
interchangeable content.
Yeah.
They sometimes are so bad in their editing, they run the same story twice in a paper. That has happened, and far too often.
Right.
And but be that as it may. So, what do you make of the first 6 months of the Latimer era in Westchester County?
Well, you know, I think in fairness, you have to realize that when he first came in, the New York State Attorney General, the New York State Attorney General, $32.2 million budget deficit, and a projected one around 28, 29 million after 2018. This is what he came in with. I think as far as leadership, I think he's been on the mark. He's been inclusive as far as working with both Democrats and Republicans and anybody. He's also gone to other municipalities, and they're studying ways of sharing services so that they don't duplicate the services to cut down costs, even going to the extreme of trying to look over their assets and maybe put workers in buildings that they own versus paying rent. You know, they're really trying to do that. So he's opened it up. The public knows he holds hearings like on the Westchester Airport.
Yes, this plays very well. Yeah.
Yeah. He's done all of that. He's bringing everybody into the process.
So now we'll see some decisions, hopefully.
Well, I don't think you can really judge, if you want to be critical, until you see his first budget. Then you've got something concrete to go on. But I mean, just one other thing, if we have.
Yes. Well, basically, okay. Why don't you finish that?
No, he's also gone around with not only Democratic county legislators but Republican county legislators to different parts of the county in their district, holding local meetings with the citizens, getting direct feedback.
That's very good. That's good. That's good.
So you can't blame him for that. Sometimes he gets a little
Dennis
angry.
Rudin, you have been heard. And now, once again, the program you host is Profiles and Issues, and that could be found on the internet. And
also the internet with the DennisRudinShow.com. You can see us 7 days a week for free. And we're also on Cablevision, on public access and FiOS.
Well, thank you. John Bailey, good night.